Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Space Between. Had a really great weekend with family. I would just encourage you that if you have siblings that have kids, spend time with them because your siblings turn into awesome parents, and you get to hang out with their kids, and it's just such a cool phenomenon. I love being an aunt. I covered that on a podcast episode a couple days ago, um, but it's just the more into it I get, the more I just absolutely love it. Dirty diapers and all. Anyway, so let's get into True Crime Tuesday. Here we are. So today on the space between True Crime Tuesday, we're looking at two different crime stories, both out of California, both involving women in their early 20s. Before we get into the heavy details, I want us to spend a moment painting a picture. We all like to think we'd know how to respond to an emergency, that we'd run into the fire to save the dog or stop to help someone at a scene of a crash, at least make a 911 call. But what if the emergency was harder to spot? What if it wasn't fire or screaming or anything obvious? What if it wasn't loud at all? What if it looked like confusion or laughter at the wrong time? Or conversations that didn't quite make any sense? What if the danger didn't announce itself, but instead felt off, a little strange, uncomfortable, maybe a little easy to dismiss? That's where today's story begins. Today we're looking at Elisa Lam and Mitrice Richardson, two young women whose final days reveal how easily a mental health crisis can slip past recognition. Their stories start in quiet places where distress looked like odd behavior instead of an emergency, and understanding didn't happen. Misunderstanding would actually become the first step towards their disappearances. Before we go any further, I want to invite you into the mind of someone living with bipolar disorder. Not the headlines, not the hype, not the stereotypes, but the lived experience. Because to understand what happened to Eliza and Matrice, we have to understand what it feels like when your own thoughts begin to speed up, when the world becomes too bright, too loud, too connected, or maybe not even connected at all. We have to understand what it's like when your brain shifts gears without your permission, when clarity blurs into confusion, when confidence turns into impulsivity, and when reality starts to go off skew just a little. This is where the unseen emergency begins, not with violence, not with chaos, but inside the mind. So, picture yourself in your most regulated state, the version of you that feels balanced and steady and whole. You wake up feeling rested, your thoughts move at a pace that you can follow. You can see the good with the bad without losing your footing. When something unexpected happens, you respond to it instead of reacting to it. Your body feels like home. Your emotions have edges that you can trace. You're sleeping regularly. You're eating when you're hungry. You're laughing when something's funny. The world feels textured but manageable, bright but not blinding. This is your perfect space between. The place where your mind and body are in rhythm, in sync, where you can trust what you see and what you feel. Now, imagine that rhythm starting to change. Slowly at first, but then all at once. Now you haven't slept well in 3, maybe 5 days. Your body's tired, but your mind doesn't care. It's alive, it's electric. Every thought feels urgent. Every idea is the best idea you've ever had. You're reacting to everything that happens in quick succession without pause, without processing. You still feel energized. So you take on project after project, cleaning the house at 3 a.m., starting a new business, planning a spontaneous trip just to shake the feeling that life has slowed down. You tell yourself you're fine. better than fine, as a matter of fact. You're productive, you're inspired, you're unstoppable. But underneath that rush, something's shifting. The world feels louder, closer. You start connecting dots that don't belong together. You start hearing meanings in things that aren't meant for you. This is mania. The high that feels like freedom until it isn't. It's the moment when the brain outruns the body, when clarity turns into chaos, and the unseen emergency begins to take shape. Let's go a little further. Now you can't get out of bed, even when you try. Your body feels heavy, like gravity's doubled overnight. You give yourself a pep talk just to take a shower, to brush your teeth, to move. Nothing feels good. Nothing feels right. The things that used to bring you comfort, music, sunlight, conversation, art, hobbies, they now feel distant and hollow. You start to wonder if you'll ever feel normal again. Life doesn't feel worth living. It feels like something you're enduring. That's depression, not sadness, but absence. The mind that once raced now stalls. The world that once felt too bright now is just a murky shade of gray. It's the other side of mania, the crash after the climb, the silence after the noise. And it's here in this quiet collapse that the unseen emergency becomes invisible again, because from the outside, it just looks like someone who's tired. This, what we just, the mental exercise, the thought exercise we just went through, that's bipolar disorder. It feels impossible to regulate because it is. You never know how long you'll have in any of the three states we've talked about, the calm, the high, the crash. Sometimes the balance lasts for weeks, sometimes only days. Sometimes a manic episode burns bright and fast, and sometimes it lingers until everything else fades. And depression can stretch on quietly, like a season that refuses to change. You live inside a rhythm you can't predict, never sure when the next shift will come, only knowing that it eventually will. That's what makes that's what makes bipolar disorder so hard to manage. It's not just the emotional flux that you're dealing with, it's all the uncertainty, the constant recalibration, the fear of losing the version of yourself that feels steady. And that's the place that Elisa Lam and Mitrice Richardson were caught in, the space between clarity and confusion, between being seen and being misunderstood. Bipolar disorder can cost you relationships with friends, with family, with your job, and maybe most painfully with yourself. Some people see the pattern and decide to medicate, hoping to find stability, but honestly, that choice comes with its own set of consequences. You're asked to talk to someone you don't know about feelings you can't fully name. You're handed prescription bottles that have to be taken on a strict schedule, even when your mind doesn't want structure. You start budgeting for appointments and refills, watching your confidence shift as the side effects appear, the weight gain, the fatigue, the emotional numbness that you feel. You miss the version of yourself that felt alive, even if that version was chaotic. You want yourself back again. And that's the cruel paradox of treatment for bipolar disorder. The very thing meant to save you can make you feel like you've lost who you really are. So maybe you stop taking your meds, or take less than you're prescribed. Maybe you tell yourself you're fine, that you've learned enough to manage it by yourself. Or maybe you just don't want to talk about it anymore. You meet someone new, you fall in love and decide not to mention the diagnosis. Not yet. Maybe a little later. Maybe not ever. Because honestly, how do you explain something that changes shape every time you think you understand it? How do you describe the way your mind can turn against you, or the way the medicine that steadies you can also make you feel like you're a stranger even to yourself? That's the quiet negotiation, the gamble for normalcy that both Eliza and Mitrice were living inside. And it's in that gamble, that fragile space between treatment and trust, that their stories began to unravel. And that's the space that we're caught in today. It's one thing to live inside that rhythm privately, to wrestle with your own mind, your own medication, your own identity. But when that rhythm spills into public view, when the world starts watching, the rules change. Suddenly, your symptoms become your behaviors. Your confusion looks like defiance, and your fear comes across as instability. The systems that are built to protect you, like hospitals, police, institutions, begin to respond not to your crisis, but to how you present it, and maybe how you inconvenience the people around you. So we have these two young women in distress, each reaching for help in a world that couldn't recognize what help looked like. Their stories unfold at the intersection of mental health and public perception, where the unseen emergency becomes visible but still not understood. So let's talk about Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam arrived in Los Angeles in late January 2013. She's 21 years old, student from Vancouver. She's traveling alone, chasing sunlight and independence. She checked into Stay on Main, and what that is, it's a budget hotel housed inside the historic Cecil Hotel building. A building in and of itself that has a complicated history, part hostel, part relic. The side that she was staying on was the more hostile side. It was like kind of an in and out situation, whereas the Cecil Hotel side of it was more of the extended stay type situation. For Eliza, this trip was supposed to be a reset, a chance to step outside of the rhythm of her illness to find herself again. But somewhere between the excitement and the exhaustion, things began to change. Her sleep started slipping. Nights stretched on a little longer. Her thoughts started racing faster. Her online posts grew more scattered. She was jumping between humor, reflection, and confusion. And quietly, she began skipping doses of her medication. Not all at once, just enough to feel more herself, just enough to believe she could manage it. But bipolar disorder doesn't negotiate. The skip doses blurred her insight. The sleeplessness amplified her mania. What looked like erratic behavior to strangers may have felt, to her, like the world speeding up. Every sound was a little sharper, every thought a little louder, every connection charged with meaning. Inside that acceleration, Eliza was losing her grip on reality. In the days that followed, her behavior began to draw attention. Guests of the hotel reported strange encounters, elevator doors that wouldn't close, a young woman walking around talking to herself, moving as if she were trying to escape something that no one else was seeing. The staff noticed her confusion but didn't see any danger. They more or less just saw a traveler acting oddly, not someone in the middle of a crisis. And then she was gone. Gone. When police began searching, they found the elevator footage. It was grainy and a little creepy and haunting. Hard to understand what was happening. Eliza's pressing buttons, stepping in and out, hiding, gesturing as if she was talking to someone that wasn't seen in any camera views. The internet turned it into a mystery. The world watched and speculated and dissected it. But beneath the theories and the fear, the truth was simpler and sadder. She was a young woman in the middle of a manic episode, untreated, unseen, and misunderstood. The footage became a symbol, not of horror, but of how easily a mental health emergency can be mistaken for something else. For weeks, no one knew where Elisa Lam was. Her parents called, the police searched, and the internet and the media speculated. The elevator footage spread like wildfire. A mystery stripped of its context, replayed millions of times by people who didn't know exactly what they were watching. 2 weeks later, maintenance workers found her body in a water tank on the roof of the building. It's the same water that had been flowing through the hotel's pipes, filling sinks and showers. That water carried her story. The official report pointed to accidental drowning complicated by bipolar disorder. But the deeper truth was harder to name. She was a young woman, lost in the space between illness and misunderstanding, between help and neglect. The world saw a mystery. What it missed was a mental health emergency, one that unfolded in plain sight, unseen by the systems built to protect her. But imagine if the reaction to the weird had been different, if the staff had paused long enough to ask whether she was safe instead of just thinking of her as disruptive. If someone had recognized the signs, the sleeplessness, the confusion, the racing thoughts, and called for help instead of security. Maybe she would have been guided back to her medication, back to rest, back to safety. Maybe the story would have ended with recovery instead of her on a rooftop she should have never had access to. Maybe those other hotel guests and maintenance workers wouldn't have had to experience the trauma of bathing in contaminated water and discovering what no one should ever have to see. That's the fragile line between protection and perception, the space where empathy could have changed everything. And that's where the story turns, from Eliza's tragedy to another woman's, one that echoes the same silence, the same misunderstanding, and the same unseen emergency. All right. So Mitrice Richardson, her story unfolds 6 years before Eliza's. She was living a very, very similar but different emergency. She was a 24-year-old college graduate from Los Angeles. She was magnetic, intelligent, deeply loved. Some say that she was strikingly beautiful. She had dreams of becoming a psychologist, of helping others understand the mind that she herself was beginning to struggle to manage. On the night of September 16th, 2009, Mitrice drove to a restaurant in Malibu. She ordered a steak and a cocktail. Pretty normal. But her behavior was erratic. She was speaking in tangents, joining conversations at other tables uninvited. She was unable to pay her bill. She was making connections that didn't make sense. To the diners, it looked strange. To the staff, it looked disruptive. But to anyone trained in mental health crisis, it would have looked like a mind in distress, racing, fragmented, trying to hold everything together. The police were called. Mitrice was arrested for defrauding an innkeeper, a misdemeanor, because she couldn't pay for her meal. She was taken to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station, booked, and held for several hours. Her mother called repeatedly asking officers to keep her overnight until morning so she could pick her up safely. But just after midnight, Mitrice was released, alone, without her phone, without a wallet, without her car, into the dark hills of Malibu. She vanished. For months, her family searched, begged for answers, fought through the bureaucratic silence. Because listen, obviously, there's some systematic problems there that she was released without any of those things at midnight, far away from her car, far away from any kind of human connection that she has. So there was a lot of silence coming from that police station originally. 11 months later, her remains were found in a canyon less than 8 miles from the station. 8 miles doesn't really seem that far, but in that terrain, steep, wild, and unlit, 8 miles might as well have been a world away. She had no flashlight, no phones, no maps. The mountains around Malibu are unforgiving after dark. Narrow roads, thick brush, sudden drop-offs. The kind of silence that swallows sound. On foot, it would have been a 2-hour hike at best. Longer if she was feeling disoriented, frightened, or trying to find her way by instinct alone. All signs indicate that that's what was happening. That's the distance between getting rid of an annoyance in your police station and protection, the space where a single decision can mean survival or loss. It's the distance between paperwork and humanity, between a system that wants quiet and a person who needed care. Mitrice wasn't a threat. She was a young woman in crisis asking for help in the only way her mind could manage that night. And when the system chose convenience over compassion, it didn't just fail her, it failed everybody who loved her, everyone who searched for her, everyone who had to live with the silence that followed. The canyon where she was found wasn't just a place, it was the physical shape of that silence. It was a big, gouging canyon of silence. When Mitrice Richardson vanished, the official search slowed. The statements blurred, the system moved on. But there was one person who refused to let the silence settle. Her name was Dr. Ronda Hampton. She was a clinical psychologist from Diamond Bar, California. She was also Mitrice's former employer and her mentor. Remember, Mitrice wanted to be a psychologist. She wasn't assigned to the case. She wasn't paid to investigate it. She was simply someone who cared enough to keep asking questions when everyone else stopped. Dr. Hampton became the voice the system couldn't ignore. She was organizing searches, she was connecting with families of other missing people, and she was demanding accountability from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. She understood what Mitrice's behavior meant because she had seen it before. The racing thoughts, the fragmented speech, the signs of a manic episode misread as defiance and criminal activity. Where others saw weird, she saw crisis. I would dare say that Ronda Hampton was how we all like to think we would be in an emergency. She was steady, clear-eyed, and she was unwilling to let fear or fatigue dull her compassion. She didn't wait for permission or credentials, she acted from conscience. When the system stalled, she kept moving. When the story faded, she kept speaking. She kept it alive. She kept the searches going. She became the connection between families, journalists, and investigators. The person who refused to let her name disappear into the paperwork. Dr. Hampton embodied what protection actually looks like: persistence, empathy, and the refusal to accept silence as closure. She reminds us that advocacy isn't born from expertise, it's born from love. The kind that refuses to stop showing up even when the world has moved on. So where do we hold these stories? Elisa's, Mitrice, Dr. Hampton's. We hold them in truth. The truth that mental health remains hugely under-prioritized in America. Less than half our law enforcement agencies have dedicated mental health response teams. Less than half. There's also the truth that the officer who arrived at the restaurant to deal with Mitrice was on the back end of a double shift, exhausted, overextended, doing his best inside a system that asks too much and trains too little. It can't be understated here. Responder wellness directly shapes how a crisis unfolds. And you can see that in so many true crime stories when you break down how the responder responds to the incident and how it escalates or de-escalates. Perfect example of that. When the person arriving is depleted, the outcome bends more towards procedural than being empathetic and helpful. But responders aren't the only ones who shape these moments. The bystanders matter too. The people who saw something strange and didn't know what to do, the ones who looked away because it felt uncomfortable or confusing. In both Elisa's and Mitrice's story, a single act of recognition, a question, a pause, a call for help, it could have changed everything. Mental health is everyone's responsibility. It lives in the space between us, in how we notice, how we respond, how we choose to care, even when it's not convenient. These stories remind us that reform isn't just about policy, it's about presence, about building systems and communities that protect both those in crisis and those responding to it. Because the unseen emergency isn't only in the mind of the person who's suffering, it's in the moments when the rest of us fail to see them. So, in closing, yes, this is True Crime Tuesday, and real crimes happened here. But if you're coming to this space, the space between what we do here, you don't come for the sensationalized story, you come for the heart of it. And the heart here is this: we have to pay attention to the quiet emergencies as well as the loud ones. We have to have conversations and check ins with people we think might be in crisis. We have to encourage regulation, emotional, mental, physical, and we have to speak to the experiences that often go unseen. Because mental health isn't someone else's responsibility, it's everyone's. It's the bystander who notices something off and chooses to ask questions instead of ignore it. It's the friend who checks in. It's the responder who takes a breath before reacting. The unseen emergency is all around us, in the quiet, in the confusion, in the moments that are but don't look urgent. And if we can learn to see those moments, to respond with empathy instead of fear, maybe the next story won't end in tragedy. Maybe it'll end in connection, perhaps maybe even healing. Thanks for diving in. Every time you show up here, you help make this space what it is: a place for truth, for empathy, and for conversations that matter. And I truly believe that this conversation about mental health, it's one we don't have enough in our culture, and it really does matter. I'll see you on the next True Crime Tuesday, guys. Have a good one.